What teams improved their rosters most in 2024, plus news and notes from across college football after the Stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 46 of Good Morning College Football. I am Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you for joining us this Monday morning. We've got quite a bit to get to, but with 96 days until week 0 kicks off, we want to, of course, check in with you a little bit and thank you for supporting us at CampusToCanton.com, where you can join for as little as $2.99 per month. Get access to a wide range of written content, including just up over the past few days, we've got a post-spring CFF stock report, Fallers by Nate Marquise, CFF's Toughest Schedules by Chris K, and Jared Palmgren just posted 135 quarterbacks, 139 running backs, 181 wide receivers, and 39 tight ends in his Dynasty ranking, CFF Dynasty ranking. So that is just a small amount of the great content that is available there on the site for college fantasy football purposes. Of course, Campus to Canton, if you're unfamiliar, is another type of fantasy game that incorporates both college and NFL players. There's great C2C written content as well, plus rankings for C2C, Devi, CFF, by the smart folks on the Campus to Canton team. Discord access, get in there and ask questions, chop it up with other members, with C2C contributors, all kinds of great access. And then, of course, if you're interested in everything we've got to offer at Campus to Canton, you can become an All-22 or C2C Winning Edge member. That gets you access to our returning production database, our team profiles from CFB Winning Edge that include depth chart projections, projected point spreads, win totals, and some of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about today as far as which teams have improved their rosters the most in 2024. But also, finally, the contest is ongoing. I'm sure you've heard about it if you've been listening to the Campus to Canton podcast feed. If you would, please give your favorite C2C podcast a 5-star review and review that podcast. Make sure you mention it in Apple Podcasts. The CFB Winning Edge podcast is listed in that competition. We are not at the top of the leaderboard, but if you do like the CFB Winning Edge podcast, important to note, we've been off for a little bit as we've been working to take care of a few other things, but also our conference previews are going to be up and running this week. So we'll be getting together, Scott, Xavier, and I, to preview the MAC. We'll kick off our long form preview podcast series. We've been doing it for several years, and that's where we will put into the official record books are over or under on every projected win total officially for the 2024 season. But want to dig in a little bit here in some of the transfer news from over the weekend. There's still some potential major contributors on the market, but the top-rated player, top uncommitted offensive player, according to 247 Sports, wide receiver Elijhah Badger, who left Arizona State in the spring, he has committed to Florida, did so Friday afternoon. So the Gators, according to 247 Sports, where Badger was the top uncommitted player, Florida has now moved into the top 5 of the transfer portal rankings at 247 Sports. Badger's the latest of a string of highly rated players to commit to Florida this spring. That includes offensive lineman Jason Zendamela and cornerback Kamani McLean, both of whom were high 4-star, in McLean's case, I believe, 5-star player coming out of high school. Elsewhere, Andrew Paul, C2C favorite at running back, kind of an underrated player in high school, ended up at Georgia where some injuries really limited his ability to produce, but had a strong spring for the Bulldogs, entered the transfer portal. He has since committed to Jacksonville State, where the Gamecocks have been very busy as far as the running back position goes. At the very end of spring, we talked about it in recapping their spring game. A couple of players had to change positions, guys who were primarily listed on the online roster as quarterback and running back, or excuse me, a wide receiver. It took some snaps in the backfield, but Jacksonville State has since gotten back a player who had been in the transfer portal in Ron Wiggins to join Anwar Lewis, the top returner. Michael Dukes from USF most recently transferred late last week, and then Andrew Paul coming in on Friday turns what at one point looked like a real weakness on the roster. Jacksonville State kind of, under Rich Rodriguez, I think, has earned the benefit of the doubt. They're going to be able to run the football almost. I mean, you don't want to say regardless of who's carrying it, but there's a consistent track record there. And so even though we didn't necessarily know who was going to get the vast majority of those touches, it's certainly a situation where the coaching staff needed to add some depth. They have done that, and perhaps Andrew Paul might be, quote unquote, the most talented player now in that backfield. Is the highest rated player according to his recruiting ratings coming out of high school. 247 Rivals and On3. If you look at our team profiles, you can see Andrew Paul is the highest rated player there. But more importantly, perhaps that running back room is now much deeper than it was at the end of last week, or at the end of spring, I should say. So interesting to see how Andrew Paul works out there, and hopefully he will be fully healthy. At Michigan and Michigan State, there's been a lot of activity reinforcing the back end of both defenses, and there was a transfer that involved both programs, kind of rare. The Spartans lost Jaden Mangum, starter in the secondary last season. He is committed to Michigan, I believe was the fourth defensive back to commit to Michigan in the last 4 days, something like that. So the Wolverines very, very active, adding depth into the secondary. Michigan State replaced perhaps Mangum with a former starter at UCF, that is Nakai Martinez. So both teams very, very active, adding players in the secondary. Perhaps the biggest, besides Badger, biggest news on the offensive transfer front over the weekend was Rashad Amos, who's been on the move quite a bit. Started his career at South Carolina, transferred to Miami of Ohio, really emerged middle to late last season as part of that run to the MAC championship for the Redhawks. Entered the transfer portal again, and for a while it was a little bit quiet as far as where we thought Amos might end up. He commits to Mississippi State, then commits to Colorado. At the end of last week, decommitted and is now headed to Ole Miss. He's not the only transfer running back that the Rebels were able to add. Domonique Thomas, who had previously committed to Georgia State after beginning his career at Clemson, also committed to Ole Miss over the weekend. And part of the reason perhaps why Ole Miss continues to add at that position is that according to Neil McCready of Rebel Grove, was the first that I saw mention it, and there had been some whispers, there had been some rumors where transfer from most recently from New Mexico began his career at Alabama State. Ja'Cory Croxy Merritt is perhaps not going to be eligible for the 2020 season. So Croxy Merritt, big-time producer at New Mexico last season, has been in school since 2019. And according to Rebel Grove, according to McCready, it sounds like the eligibility issues stem from his time spent at Alabama State at the FCS level, where there's some inconsistency or some misinterpretation or different interpretations on the number of games that he played. I believe in his true freshman season, perhaps in 2019. One note is that he played in 9 games. The school and Curt Cignetti said he only played 4 games. Hopefully he'll get that cleared up, and if he was rightfully eligible for the 2024 season, hope to see him back and on the field. If not at Ole Miss, there certainly is a chance that maybe this move, these 2 moves over the weekend, indicate that Curt Cignetti is not going to be eligible there. But hopefully, if he's wanting to play college football in 2024 and should be eligible, hopefully he will find a home. But regardless, the Rebels, who've been, of course, very, very active in the transfer portal as a whole, but at the running back position specifically, having added Logan Diggs from LSU, who is currently injured, I do believe, and not expected to be on the field at the start of the start of the season. Henry Parrish from Miami, leading rusher for the Hurricanes, began his career at Ole Miss, is now back in Oxford. But Amos and Thomas expected to add some depth to that room, where Ulysses Bentley IV is the top returner there for the Rebels, but a team that we will spend a little bit more time talking about later in the show, as a team that really has continued to add to its overall roster strength. A few other quick notes at Coastal Carolina. Will McDonald was a starter at left guard for the Chanticleers. He entered the transfer portal a little while back, has committed to Cal. So the Bears are beefing up that offensive line as they look to enter their first season in the ACC. At Arizona, the Wildcats added a veteran edge defender. Lance Keeney, grad transfer from Stanford, is headed to Tucson. And then a very sad situation involving Auburn running back Brian Battie, who was injured in a shooting that also killed his brother on early Saturday morning in Sarasota, Florida. So certainly hope for the best in that situation, but a very, very bad sounding, very sad situation for Brian Battie. As far as on the field and on rosters, we spent a lot of time here talking about returning production. I think it's very important. I mean, it's part of the reason why our returning production database is the first item on our off-season to-do list. It's a part of the reason why we spend so much time and try to keep it updated as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can, and did spend a little bit of time already this morning trying to catch up on things that might have been missed over the weekend. If you're a member out there and use our returning production database and you notice something that we missed, reach out. We've had great support in that area and want to make it again, just as accurate as it can possibly be. So we'll be going back and trying to comb through all the news there. But returning production is important, right? But it's not the only thing. We talk a little bit about the most impactful it tends to be, based largely on research done by Bill Connolly at ESPN, who's basically the godfather of returning production, brought it into the vocabulary basically as far as college football goes. But what perhaps is just as, if not even more important, is how much did a team improve its roster or not based on the talent on hand. And one of the things that our team profiles does, which I think adds a little bit of a added layer, but perhaps gives us a numerical base for most improved roster, or roster that is least improved, or most downgraded, whatever the appropriate term would be, is how did this team go up or down, and by how much, in terms of our roster strength rating. So I've talked about roster strength a lot. If you've tuned in before, I'm sure you've heard me mention it, but basically roster strength is at CFB Winning Edge how we indicate what does this team look like on paper, based on position by position, unit by unit. We look at recruiting ratings coming out of high school, adjust them for experience and production. The reason we do that, we try to capture some players who might have been underrated coming out of high school. Certainly with the influx of transfers, there are plenty of guys moving up from the FCS level. So we want to incorporate production to help those guys really show how good they are on paper as far as our individual player ratings go. And, which team, once everything shakes out, players added, players subtracted into the transfer portal, out of eligibility, leaving early for the NFL draft, what have you. When we get through all of that, and we're able to look at, okay, the roster strength for this team at the end of last season, when it was most up to date in terms of all those added production points and things like that, and where it stands today in our current team profiles setup, which teams improved the most. And right now, it looks like our top 5 running these numbers. And this is based on, again, the end of season in 2023 roster strength. So that does mean some teams that had injuries at key positions, as you'll see on the screen. Number 2, Colorado. Shedeur Sanders did not play in that final game. That was part of the calculus there. They, based on that end of season roster strength, Colorado has really improved in part because its quarterback, which carries such a heavy weight, is improved on paper. So keep that in mind. But also bowl game opt-outs are part of that factor as well. So tried to, certainly make note where we need to. But right now, most improved teams as far as roster strength goes. Number 1, Indiana. Curt Cignetti, hard at work adding players, mostly from James Madison, but not entirely. Expected to start at quarterback is Kurtis Rourke, transferring from Ohio. Got an influx of players from a variety of places, but right now on paper, Indiana, based on where this team was at the end of the Tom Allen era, they've improved their roster strength rating by nearly 5 full points, which has put Indiana currently 33rd nationally in roster strength. And if you look down our team profiles, our projected depth charts, it looks like first-year starters are penciled in at 8 offensive positions, and it looks like at 7 defensive positions. Like I said, a lot of those players come from James Madison. I mean, it's almost double digits as far as the transfers coming in from James Madison. But at the running back position, Justin Ellison from Wake Forest. There's also Elijah Green from North Carolina. Also from Ohio, Miles Cross, who reuniting with Rourke there. Texas Tech transfer Miles Price, another Wake Forest transfer, Keshawn Williams, both at wide receiver. At the offensive line, there's Trey Wedding from Wisconsin. On the defensive line, CJ West from Kent State. So, the list goes on. But Curt Cignetti took over a program. The roster wasn't, in shape really to compete even with the middle of the Big Ten and as far as roster strength goes. But now that Indiana, 2 deep looks like it's going to be a very, very competitive team on paper. The schedule, which we talked about on Friday, sets up quite well. So if, this new look team, which is going to incorporate more than half a dozen likely first-year transfers, both on offense and on defense, with the returning players, bringing players in from however many programs. It's a lot to assume that it's all going to work. But if it does, this Indiana team should be much, much improved, and at least on paper is the most improved roster from the end of the 2023 season. Like I said, Colorado comes in at number 2. A big part of that is Shedeur Sanders was out in the final game of last season. But as everyone knows, Colorado has also been very, very active in the transfer portal. Though they did lose Rashad Amos, as we mentioned here earlier, added Dalen Hayden, the former Ohio State running back. So that unit, though very thin as far as scholarship running backs on the roster. Also lost Dylan Edwards, who was the leading rusher there last season. He's headed to Kansas State. But the makeover of the offensive line is big. Looks like probably 4 first-year starter transfers for Colorado in our current depth chart projections. A true freshman, Jordan Seaton, who is a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, is the 5th. Other expected transfers could compete for spots on the offensive line there, but throw in LeJontay Wester, one of the most productive receivers, certainly at the Group of 5, but in college football in general. Did so much great work at FAU last season. Pencil him in alongside Jimmy Horn and cover boy Travis Hunter, the 2-way All-American there. Colorado has really improved, from the end of last season offensively, but defensively they've done some work as well. A little bit more returning. Looks like half a dozen or so. 6 returning starters on defense. Everywhere else, we've got first-year transfers penciled in the 2 deep, in that second team. We've got 9 of 11 spots taken up by transfers. But, this Colorado team, and people love to hate them or love to love them, depending on how you see, the last year plus in Boulder under Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, and his makeover of this team. The way we calculate it, Colorado ranks 21st nationally in roster strength overall, top 20 on both offense and defense. So things could absolutely blow up, and not, the talent, the way we calculate it, where, we are certainly not perfect. Some of the players that Colorado has added, might have come in with high ratings out of high school and are, if not already busts, on their way to officially getting that designation. Nevertheless, on paper, looks pretty good. And we try to remove opinion from this. So just how these guys, factor in based on recruiting ratings coming out of high school, adjusted for experience and production. It looks good on paper as we stand right now for Colorado. 21st in roster strength and an improved team from the end of last season, even when you account for the fact that Shedeur Sanders was missing time due to injury. Number 3 on our list, and a team that we're going to spend more time talking about at the end, our team of the day, is Syracuse, a team that's really interesting to me. Fran Brown, new head coach, first-time head coach, was on staff at Georgia as an assistant previously, also has more experience in the Northeast earlier in his career. Syracuse has really come in under this new coaching staff and raised the level of talent. And, as it shows in our improved roster strength, part of that is Kyle McCord, which, again, a player who perhaps some aren't huge fans of. Won a lot of games last season at Ohio State. Whether or not it was the prettiest, it could be. You could argue, but Kyle McCord is a player who ranks highly in our individual player ratings. Has elevated that quarterback position specifically at Syracuse, which at the end of last season, if you remember, they were just trying to throw some converted tight end former quarterbacks, do wildcat type stuff. It was difficult for Syracuse at that position. Kyle McCord comes in, hopefully settles that spot, and find some more playmakers to work with. Guys like Zeed Haynes, Jackson Meeks, Justice Ross Simmons, transfers coming in from elsewhere. The health of Aronde Gadsden II is big at the tight end position. Missed 10, 11 games last season. Got hurt in week 2, I believe it was last year. The offensive line is a pretty interesting unit for Syracuse. 4 quote-unquote starters returning, and also 4 first-year transfers coming in, including a guy who was a starter at Colorado last season, Savion Washington. Some guys coming back from injury as well. So Syracuse is a team that, on the defensive side of the ball, the experience pretty good, especially in the back 7. Transfers have been a major upgrade under this coaching staff. On the defensive side of the ball, you got guys like Fadil Diggs, Deion Wilson Jr., Isaiah Hastings, James Hurd. Also, getting Deuce Chestnut back, who things didn't work out for him at LSU, but he was a starter and quite productive earlier in his career at Syracuse. So a team that is really interesting to me, as we'll dig into. A lot of winnable games, a lot of games where we have the Orange favored that you might not expect. Number 4 in our most improved rosters, as far as our roster strength numbers go, SMU. And this is, quite honestly, not just players being added via the transfer portal, because for the most part, other than right now 2 guys penciled in to start on the defensive line, this is mostly a returning production case. SMU has just gotten healthier. That's part of it, because Preston Stone didn't finish the season at quarterback, so perhaps an asterisk by SMU here. But they've really added depth on the offensive line, addressed some needs on the defensive line, went heavy into the transfer portal. There, we're expecting Mike Lockhart and Jafari Harvey to pencil into starting spots, but Anthony Booker, Jared Harrison Hunt could be as well. More than half a dozen defensive line transfers. So this SMU team as a whole is experienced. So gets another, get some percentage points for that, but also filling in, whether it's some holes in the defensive line, but also just adding depth, raising the floor of this roster strength rating for SMU. Number 5 is Miami. Miami, of course, made a splash with the addition of Cam Ward, who had entered the NFL draft, decided, late he was going to come back, going to go and transfer to Miami, most recently at Washington State. We read all the rave reviews this spring of how well Cam Ward was performing at quarterback, the rapport that he was developing, most notably with Xavier Restrepo, but also guys like Jacoby George. But Miami has added even more around Cam Ward. The addition of Damien Martinez from Oregon State this spring is a big one. That, we mentioned Henry Parrish moving on. There have been some injuries to players like Mark Fletcher and A.J. Allen that have limited that running back group, to the point where a true freshman tight end, Elijah Lofton, was getting carries, was getting reps late in the spring, or throughout the spring, I should say. Miami also added a little bit of depth at wide receiver, Samuel Brown, who looks like he could slot into one of those 3 starting spots alongside Restrepo and George. He'll be competing with some talented guys, including a couple of freshmen, Josiah Trader being one of them, who was doing good things this spring, Nikar another. On defense, there's been a little bit of a revolving door for the defensive line there in Coral Gables, but guys like Elijah Alston, Simeon Barrow, CJ Clark, Marley Cook coming in, expected to potentially beef up that group. And then the secondary, which was a little bit of an area of concern, they've continued to address with a guy like Deani Hill, transferred from Marshall, where he was a starter last season, joining other starters like Isaiah Taylor and Michelle Powell, who could be competing for major playing time, if not a starting position there for Miami. But a few other teams that just missed the cut of the top 5 as far as just added to their roster strength rating at the end of last season. Wake Forest narrowly missed the cut. Baylor, Florida, who big boost in the last couple of weeks, as we mentioned. Notre Dame and Florida State, both of them, talking about the end of season, the opt-outs were a major factor there, but both teams addressed major needs and players who had departed for whatever reason. If we drill down a little bit on offensive roster strength, Florida State is a team, of course, the opt-outs are a big factor, but the Noles come in at number 1, DJ Uyunglele solidifying that quarterback position we expect. But Syracuse, number 2. Mentioned McCord, mentioned those transfers coming in at wide receiver. That's important. Colorado, again, Shedeur Sanders, that's part of it. SMU and Miami. So very, very similar numbers here, but digging in a little bit more, and a team like Baylor pops up again. A team that, certainly disappointing last season, has had some success under Dave Aranda. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster at times, but a team that's just sort of hanging around inside the top 10 and a lot of these improved metrics that we look at that, might not be a huge indicator, but when you're looking for a team that, perhaps has the ability to take a step forward as far as wins and losses go, as far as how well they play on the field, Baylor has improved its roster. They're 8th in our offensive roster strength added this season. Texas A&M, top 10 in this category this year. Injuries a part of that at the quarterback position, but another team that was very, very active in the early months of the transfer portal, and I think worth noting. Defensively, who has improved the most? And here we get a little bit of a different group of teams. Purdue is a team that sticks out to me. I think we mentioned them in our early P4 win total projections as a team where our projections are much higher, give a bigger projected edge against the, I believe it was Circus Sports we compared to their win totals. Purdue defensively right now just ekes out ahead of arch rival Indiana as far as most improved defense on paper. Michigan State, a team, as we said, was very, very active in the transfer portal, especially in the secondary, adding, Elijhah Martinez. They also added Jeremiah Hughes, former LSU transfer, Lejean Cavajos, who began his career at Ohio State, most recently at North Carolina. All those players, since they were added so late in the process, currently in our projected backups for the Spartans, but certainly could see any of them emerging as starters this year. Ed Woods, another late addition, former starter at Arizona State. And then you bring back guys like Chance Rucker and Dylan Tatum, who were starters, Angelo Gross as well. In the secondary, that is an area where perhaps Michigan State's going to turn it from a weakness into a strength. Also added some transfers like Wayne Matthews III from Old Dominion, very productive linebacker. On the defensive line, could see several transfers who end up as starters. Daquan Dowse being one of them, Quindarius Dunnigan, Ben Roberts most recently. But on the offensive side of the ball, most notably Aidan Chiles stepping in that Jonathan Smith system that he was able to learn at Oregon State in his true freshman year. That I think is really going to pay off. But there's some depth, some experience behind him, and another transfer, Tommy Schuster, who played a lot, 42 starts at North Dakota at the FCS level. So should something happen with Chiles, Michigan State still has an experienced player there. Nate Carter returning at running back, but they add K'Ron Lynch-Adams, the transfer from UMass, who was over 1,000-yard rusher last season. And, a couple of additions on the offensive line are going to add depth and get some guys healthy, throw them into the mix as well. This Michigan State team in a much better position on paper than it was at the end of last season. South Carolina, kind of an interesting team to me as well, made some strides on the defensive side of the ball, adding Kyle Kennard as an edge defender, linebacker Bengali Kamara, others expected to play significant snaps in that front seven for the Gamecocks. Also added back former starter has starting experience. Muhammad Kaba started last season before suffering an injury very, very early. Getting him back will be good for the Gamecocks as well, who rank in the top 35 in our overall roster strength numbers. So adding to that, defense that was slightly better than FBS average last year. As far as team performance goes, they were 58th. It's going to be a very, very difficult road for the Gamecocks this year. But as much as they added on offense, and though they didn't break into the top 5 in our numbers, looks like maybe 5 first-year transfer starters who are going to be counted on heavily, and another 5 to 6 in that 2 deep on the offensive side of the ball. South Carolina, a lot of transition, but at least on paper, the way we calculate it is improved. One item that we wanted to look at as well, this is available in our team profiles in our ratings and rankings tab. We do look at, what's the average video game rating, our overall individual player rating for starters on both offense and defense combined. And one thing that wanted to take a look at, again, how do those compare to the end of the 2024 season? And this potentially could be even more instructive than just roster strength. And this is where we see some similar names: Indiana, Colorado. Nebraska is a pretty interesting team there. We do have Dylan Raiola, the 5-star true freshman, penciled in as the starter at quarterback for the Cornhuskers. That's going to be part of it. But again, injuries are part of this calculation as well. If players were missing time at the end of last year, Turner Cochran at left tackle, one of those players. He's over a 90 rated player in our individual player ratings. If he's back and fully healthy, Nebraska is going to be in a better spot. But also, last year's starting quarterback, Henrik Harburg, missed time at the end of last season. Gabe Irvin Jr., who was the starter at running back at the beginning of the season. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, who looked like he might have been off to a pretty good start before going down with injury. So that Nebraska offense taking a step forward, in addition to some new talent. 5-star true freshman at quarterback, but then Dante Dowdle, the running back transfer from Oregon, Jamal Banks, who I've always been a big fan of, transferring from Wake Forest. He's a big target, has flashed at times. Isaiah Nair was a big play receiver a few years ago at Wyoming, transferred to Texas, got hurt, didn't work out there for him, but he is now at Nebraska. Curious to see how he factors in. So, comparing end of last season to the beginning of this season, in each of these categories, overall roster strength, offense, defense, and then focusing in on starters specifically, maybe gives us a little bit of an indication. Okay, what are the most improved rosters in college football so far this season? We're not going to spend a ton of time looking at things on the other end, because for the most part, those are, returning production issues. So those are maybe captured a little bit more in that returning production database. But if we're just looking at starters, a team like Washington, a team like Michigan, a team like Alabama, unsurprisingly, on paper, because they're going to be relying on less experienced players. And some of those teams have been more active in the transfer portal of late, Michigan most notably. And, Washington and Alabama pretty busy this spring as well, but still quite a bit of a drop-off compared to the end of last season. If you're looking roster strength-wise, if you're looking for starters, those three are among the biggest downgrades in these numbers among Power 4 programs. Some other teams certainly of note, Troy, our lowest rated, in our returning production rankings, Troy has seen a big drop off, and Air Force certainly up there. Teams again that reflected in those returning production numbers. All right, we're moving a little ahead of schedule, but I think that's okay. We will dig into more stories this time of the year. You're getting a lot more, player features, less as far as, newsy bits. This is what happened in spring practice, things like that. But, writers out there who, of course, cover these teams year round, do a great job digging into some of the details, things we might have missed when things were just swirling so much this spring. So on Wednesday, we're going to catch up on some of those stories. I know, as we entered the final 100 days of the off season, we're getting to see some of those countdowns, top 100 lists and things like that. So I'm sure we'll dig into some of that. But today, if we go a little bit early, finish up a little bit early, I think that's all right. But do want to spend a little time here at the end talking about Syracuse. Mention Syracuse is a team that really just sort of has my interest. It's a tough place to be super, competitive on the recruiting trail, or at least that's sort of how we've been thinking about it recently. Syracuse, I currently live in Vermont. Syracuse, I think, is my closest team. It's maybe equidistant between Boston College, but Syracuse is pretty close to Upper New England, and there's just not a ton of high school talent in the Upper Northeast. One of the things that Fran Brown and his coaching staff have hit really hard are talent centers in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, specifically Philadelphia, due to some ties there. And that's really paid off. It seems like this new coaching staff has been able to make a major impact on the high school recruiting trails. There were some of those great athletic pieces about the anonymous coaches and who's recruiting well in certain areas. A lot of positive reports coming from high school coaches, not just in the Northeast, but elsewhere because there are ties to the SEC. Fran Brown being in Georgia, as defensive coordinator, Elijah Robinson at Texas A&M. So that's had some impact. Some players who had connections there, whether it was signed with A&M coming out of high school or were maybe heavily recruited by the Aggies. Syracuse has been able to get involved in. And then there are some Georgia transfers also. Zede Haynes, Jackson Meeks among those. If we look here on our return or our team profiles, our transfers in section, you can see, you've got transfers, of course, from Ohio State, Kyle McCord, Georgia, both of those wide receivers, Colorado State, Justin Ross Simmons, he's a New York native. On the offensive line, they've been very aggressive, adding guys from power programs like Georgia, but also digging in to the FCS level for a little more experience. A player like Cody Hornsby on the offensive line was a starter at Grambling. Demetrius Weatherspoon, double-digit starter at Howard at the FCS level. They're being very creative. Mentioned the guys like Fadil Diggs coming in from Texas A&M, some starters in the secondary, or potential starters, guys who could contribute from places like Notre Dame. Clarence Lewis, Deuce Chestnut, most recently at LSU, started his career at Syracuse. We've got other transfers from West Virginia, Louisville, Alabama, Isaiah Hastings on that. But also, can you dig into New Mexico State for a Deion Wilson Jr., California native, but able to find his way out to Syracuse. And so will this influx of talent pay off on the field for Syracuse? Syracuse has been a tough out. They were under Dino Babers. It's been a few years now, but it seemed like for a little while there, it was Clemson's worst nightmare, potentially, was playing Syracuse, playing at the Dome. But this is a team that has just been struggling for consistency. And part of that was they didn't recruit at, a top 30, top 25 type level. Based on our most up-to-date number, Syracuse ranks 31st in overall roster strength, 37th on the offensive side of the ball, 32nd on defense. But this is a team that performed below FBS average in our team performance numbers last season. They were, 6-7 overall, got blown out by USF in the bowl game. Finished with a team performance rating overall of 77. On the offensive side of the ball, 94th. Some of that was the quarterback injuries that we discussed, but still, there's a lot of room for improvement on that offensive side of the ball with Kyle McCord, with LaQuint Allen, one of the better running backs in the ACC, running behind an experienced offensive line with 4 returning starters. And then defense was, a little bit better than FBS average, 60th overall last season, 58th against the pass, 53rd against the run, but looks better on paper. Brings back 5 full-time starters in the back 7, added some talent up front, guys we mentioned like Diggs, Wilson, Hastings. Certainly did lose some talented players, some experienced players like Kevon Darton was a starter up front. Stefan Thompson at linebacker. Leon Lowry ended up at Wisconsin, Thompson ended up at Nebraska. Lowry ended up at Wisconsin. So those are going to be certainly losses. But if we look at our team profiles and how these teams shake up, factor in, new head coach. So we have to put a generic rating in that area, but still, based on the increase in team strength, in roster strength, and a schedule that currently ranks 57th in our strength of schedule numbers, this is a potentially very, very interesting Syracuse team. We have Syracuse favored in 9 games this season. Start with Ohio, one of the lower ranked teams in our returning production numbers, lost a ton from last year's 10-win team. Georgia Tech, very experienced on offense, but we do have Syracuse as a slight favorite at home in that game. New ACC member Stanford, I think will be an improved team, but Syracuse hosts the Cardinal, who are going to have to travel, 3,500, 4,000 miles across the country. Stanford is very, very high in our returning production numbers, but still not quite sure they're as good as this Syracuse team on paper. Holy Cross, very good FCS program, but lost its head coach to James Madison, and has to deal with a similar recruiting footprint. So it's not like Holy Cross is the most talented FCS team, though they have been very, very good in recent years. UNLV, really intriguing matchup. Syracuse does have to go the other way, take in a road trip to a Mountain West opponent, UNLV, which jumped up and beat a Power 5 program last season. It was Vanderbilt, but still a team that has a similar talent profile to Syracuse traditionally. That's going to be a very, very tough matchup. We do have Syracuse as a slight favorite in that game, but that one is maybe the toughest of these first 5 weeks for the Cuse. So there are certainly losable games, as you see here. That projection against Georgia Tech at home is roughly 60-40 in our numbers. That UNLV projection, very similarly, 60-40. Syracuse absolutely could lose one of those two games, could lose both of those games. But a 5-0 start is absolutely on the table before that trip to NC State. And that is going to be back-to-back road games. That's a pretty tough spot against a team that's getting a little bit of ACC title buzz, sort of a dark horse candidate there. NC State, most would peg them as third, fourth, fifth in your ACC power rankings, but a very, very dangerous team in Raleigh, a tough place to play. Syracuse does get the week off before getting that Big East group there: Pitt, Virginia Tech, and Boston College, where we have Syracuse as less than a field goal favorite in all 3 games. 2 of those 3 on the road, at Pitt on a Thursday night, at Boston College. Do have the Orange favored, but very, very slightly in those games. And then Virginia Tech, a team that most would say is better than this Syracuse team, but has to travel to the Dome on November 2nd. Syracuse gets a couple of extra days to prepare for that game. We'll see if that pays off. And then late in November at Cal, very tough road trip. We do have the Bears favored, but by less than a point in that game. Non-conference, they get UConn at home. So we have Syracuse as nearly a 3-touchdown favorite, but then finish the season at home, but against that Miami team that, as we said, is very, 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 very talented, certainly, but has added and ranks among the top teams in the country as far as our overall roster strength improvements on paper. So Syracuse ranks 30th in our most up-to-date returning production numbers, 30th on the offensive side of the ball, 51st on defense. As far as raw returning production goes, it's a little closer to FBS average. They're 59th overall, 64th on offense, 57th on defense, just based on what's coming back, what's not from last year. Running back is an area where the Orange are the depth is not great. So Allen is very talented, has been productive at times in his career. Last season led Syracuse with over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns on the ground, can catch a little bit out of the backfield as well. 38 catches, 210 yards, and 1 touchdown. But behind him right now, it looks like 2 freshmen, with Yasin Willis being the one who is getting most of the spring buzz. But should something happen to Allen, that position group is getting thin really, really quick. They did lose Donovan Brown. He is currently not with the team. Also, a couple of transfers. Damien Alford, perhaps the most notable starter for the Orange, who ends up at Utah. But the offensive line, pretty good shape here on paper. Three players started all 13 games last season. 2 of those return, Jondre Reed and Enrique Cruz. 2 other double-digit starters, Mark Petrie and Jacob Bradford, are back as well, plus 2 others who got at least 2 games of starting experience. And then Savion Washington, the Colorado transfer, had 10 starts for the Buffs last year. We mentioned those FCS transfers as well. So offensive line looks like it should be a strength. On defense, the top 4 tacklers all return from last year's team: Marlo Wax, Justin Barron, Elijah Clark, and Darren McDonald. Then there's quite a bit that they're missing. Isaiah Johnson, Jason Simmons, and Caleb. I'm butchering that name. My apologies. Defensive linemen, all out of eligibility. And then a few guys transferred out that we mentioned: Stephon Thompson, Deon Lowry, defensive lineman Kevin Darton. But, on paper, as we mentioned, a lot of winnable games. Syracuse is going to be a factor. Not sure that they're going to make a run at an ACC title, but the schedule, other than a cross-country road trip here, a trip to Raleigh there, Miami on the schedule, but they don't play Clemson, they don't play Florida State, and a lot of those other winnable games. Tough opponent, Virginia Tech, comes to Syracuse, so that one looks like a coin flip the way we calculate it. Very interesting team to me, a team that, if everything comes together, that roster, revamped roster and new head coach, it all gels quickly. I think Syracuse is a team that's on the rise, but it's a tough place. It's tough sometimes to draw players from far away to go into Syracuse and those harsh winters as they can be. So we'll see how it plays out long term. But this year, I think the Orange are going to be a very, very competitive team. Look like perhaps headed back to a bowl game, and then who knows? Maybe there's a little bit of a higher ceiling there as well. So that is going to do it for us today. Thank you for joining us, whether it was live on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, where please, if you would, subscribe, like this video. That really helps us to grow, helps keep some positive momentum as we're now under 100 days ahead of the college football season kicking off in late August. And then if you get an opportunity, we really would appreciate if you would rate and review on Apple Podcasts, the Campus to Canton podcast feed. A lot of great shows go into there, so make sure you mention your favorite show. I know some are enticing those reviews with potentially a chance to win a copy of the EA Sports College Football 25. I think some are giving away cash up to $150, I think. But also, the good folks at CFB Winning Edge, our conference previews are starting up soon. So if those have been useful to you in the past, if you're looking forward to them this year, we, of course, would appreciate your kind words there. But thank you so much to those of you who support us, whether it's watching this show or whether you're a member at campustocanton.com, which, on that note, very quickly, last thing, if you sign up as an All-22 or C2C Winning Edge tier member, and we've had a couple sign up recently for annual memberships, which we greatly appreciate. You are our very favorite people. But a couple have had some email addresses that I'm trying to send access to, and it bounces back. I've put out some calls, on Twitter or things like that. But if you're not receiving the access that you're paying for, please reach out to us. We want to get that cleared up as quickly as possible. But sometimes it's just a little bit of an issue with an email address. It doesn't match, maybe the information that comes through in our system, or, sometimes things happen. So if you're not getting that access, please reach out to us, and we want to get that rectified as quickly as possible. So on that note, have a wonderful Monday. We will see you back on Wednesday for Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFP Winning Edge at CampusToCanton.com. Take care, and we will see you then.